Just let me know if you are hearing me. Can you hear me? Microphone's not doing anything. Hold on. Hello? Hello, hello? 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 Hello, hello? All right, if you guys can hear me, hit the chat room and say you can hear me. Hello? Hello, hello? 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 All right, if you guys can hear me, hit the chat room and say you can hear me. Hello, hello? Hello? Hello, hello? 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 Hit the chat room and say you can hear me. Hello? 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 Hit the chat room and say you can hear me. Hello? 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 Hello, hello. The chat room and say you can hear me. Hello, hello. Hello. Hello, hello. The chat room and say you can hear me. Hello. Hello, hello. The chat room and say you can hear me. Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Hello, hello. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, type in the chat room that you can hear me. Hello, hello. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, type in the chat room that you can hear me. Hello, hello. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, type in the chat room that you can hear me. If you can hear me, type in the chat room that you can hear me. Okay. All right, so you can hear me. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Mr. Mummaw here. Welcome you all to a live broadcast of U.S. history. Today we're going to be talking about World War II. So As usual, if you have any questions, type them in the chat room or relate them. Whoever's on chat room duty, you just relate the questions to that person. That person type them in the chat room. I'll answer the questions as they pop up. Remember, there is something like a 3-second delay. Now, it should be okay today. I got my computer upgraded to a 16 gig hard drive. It was 4 gig in terms of the memory and everything like that, but it was really slow. So rather than go to the 8 gig route, I just had them put it up on 16. So things should be going really fast. Things should be going really well. Camera's pretty good. So hopefully all the problems we had before are solved. Now, it should be okay today. Hopefully you guys have all the term sheets in front of you, or however it's arranged that everybody has terms in front of them. What I usually like to do is I'll stand in front of the whiteboard and go through the kind of the PowerPoint and everything like that and talk about things. I don't know, do you guys have the PowerPoint down there? You do get the, you guys have all the term sheets in front of you, or however it's arranged that everybody has terms in front of them. What I usually like to do is I'll stand in front of the whiteboard and go through the kind of the PowerPoint and everything like that and talk about things. I don't know, do you guys have the PowerPoint down there? You do get the, you guys have all the term sheets in front of you, or however arranged that everybody has terms in front of them. What I usually like to do is I'll stand in front of the whiteboard and go through the kind of the PowerPoint and everything like that and talk about things. Okay. Well, let's assume you do. To begin with, guys, the end of the Great Depression, we talked a little bit about assuming we talked a little bit, we've gone over so far, about the rise of Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini, Japanese militarism, all that stuff. World War II begins with, in 1939, Hitler invades Poland. Britain and France declare war on Hitler. Hitler then attacks France, defeats France in 6 weeks, leading to the capitulation of France. France is divided into two different countries. And then Britain gets involved, or Britain is now the last guy involved. Now, Germany and Italy and Japan have now signed, or will immediately after this, sign a pact, the Axis Pact, which basically puts everybody together as the Axis powers. The Axis powers being Germany, Japan, and Italy. Now, this is not really, strictly speaking, a military alliance. None of these guys are bound to go to war for the others, and there's not really an attempt at any point to coordinate their military strategy. However, all three of them are together. They all basically support each other, at least diplomatically, and they're going to be allies throughout the rest of the war. Now, Mussolini, we talked about Hitler already, the rise of Hitler, but the rise of Hitler is prefaced, it's inspired by the rise of Mussolini. Mussolini's fascist party, you hear the word fascist thrown around quite a bit. Fascist refers specifically to a political party in the interwar years in Italy. The fascists take as their symbol the ancient Roman fasces, which is basically an axe with a bundle of sticks tied around it. And the fasces symbolizes the Roman state's power of corporal punishment, punishment on your corpus, on your body, and capital punishment, punishment on your caput, your head, like that. It's a symbol of strong state power. Mussolini's guys, they embrace this as their symbol. Now, the fascists are basically defined, there's a lot of ways to, define the word fascist. For our purposes, we're going to say that fascists support basically statism and militarism. The fascists glorify the state. They want a powerful state united behind a single leader. And militarism. Militarism is the glorification of war and armies and violence. Mussolini thinks that Italy needs a big army, needs to take over other people, that kind of thing. So those two things together are the backbone of the fascist party. Economically, they're kind of between capitalist and communist. And the relationship between fascism and socialism, Mussolini starts off as a socialist, is pretty complicated, and it's kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing here. But just know that Mussolini is the guy who's going to inspire Hitler. He's about I wouldn't call him a whole generation before Hitler, but he's like 10 years ahead of Hitler in basically everything he does. Now, Mussolini is a bad guy. He's not anywhere in Hitler's league, though. Mussolini does not massacre his own population to the degree Hitler does. He'll get sucked into World War II. As Hitler becomes the dominant character in the relationship, Mussolini's left kind of following along with what Hitler does and drags Italy into World War II, and Italy really suffers for it. Now, so that's the Axis powers. We got Japan. We know about Japan. The Empire of Japan. Japan modernizes very quickly after 1858. They get a modern army, a modern navy. They in the 1920s, Japan's got a big economic depression, has a lot of problems. 1930s, they invade China, take over, commit all kinds of atrocities. The United States, we talked about United States embargoes a bunch of stuff for Japan. They end up getting, Japan gets mad basically at this and realizes they have to cut their war effort, either that or find new sources of materials. They want to attack the Dutch East Indies, get their oil, but that means war with the Dutch, means war with the British, which means war with America. And for that reason, they attack Pearl Harbor and Hawaii in December 1941. So you got Japan, you got Hitler, enter Axis powers, and that's where World War II is when the United States basically gets into it in 1942. Now, before the United States gets into it, it's a little background might be in order, and it's all the European situation. Today, we're talking about World War II in Europe. I divided World War II up into two distinct lectures, World War II in Europe and World War II in the Pacific. Doing Europe first, because that was Roosevelt's priority. Even though it's Japan that attacks us in the Pacific, Franklin Roosevelt believes that America needs to take out the situation in Europe first, because he believes that if Hitler conquers Europe, it's way worse than Japan conquering the Pacific. So initially, we're going to try to fight a defensive strategy in the Pacific. Later on, that will turn into the island hopping thing that we'll talk about. But before America gets involved, understand that Hitler really has gone from win to win to win up to this point. As you roll into 1940, Hitler has just gone from success to success. He's done all kinds of, politically, diplomatically, militarily, he just keeps winning. So Hitler has every justification for confidence that he's going to succeed in the future. And his last real enemy, as he sees it on his western flank, is Britain. Hitler wants Britain to surrender. He wants them to either become essentially a satellite state of Germany, or failing that, just get conquered directly. But he wants Britain off his back, because even at this point, he's got a plan to betray Stalin and invade Russia. Britain, though, has a new prime minister, the guy Neville Chamberlain, who signed the deal with Hitler. He's out, and he's replaced with a guy named Winston Churchill, who himself has a colorful pre-war career. Served in the army in India, became a journalist, went into politics, big in World War I, political disaster in World War I. He's part of plans of failed invasion at Gallipoli. He ruins his reputation for a while. Throughout the late 1920s and 30s, he's the guy saying Hitler's bad, he's worse than you think. So he's kind of the guy who saw all this coming. So when Hitler finally does attack France, he's in position now to become prime minister. Winston Churchill refuses to treat the Nazi government as any kind of legitimate government, and he certainly refuses to surrender or sign any kind of agreement with Hitler. Now, the problem Hitler has, as far as invading Britain is that if you look on a map, you can see that there is a very narrow, Britain's an island, and there's this narrow little channel of water there. It's actually narrow enough that someone could swim across this channel, and people have. Not just regular people, but trained swimmers can swim across the English Channel from England and France. But small though it is, it's pretty much impossible to move an army, an entire military force across this little narrow channel without suffering horrible casualties. The British are going to attack the ships and everything. And the British Navy is the best Navy in the world. If you're an island, having the best Navy in the world is better than having the best army. So, a direct invasion of Britain is going to be too hard right off the bat for Hitler. So what Hitler decides to do is just bomb England. He's going to send his bombers across the English Channel to drop bombs on Britain to kind of terrify the population so that they'll demand their own government surrender. And this air attack on England is called the Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain is an air war. Hitler sends his bombers to England to bomb, and the British try to fight them off. Now, initially, the British have a disadvantage. They haven't rearmed during the interwar years, whereas Germany has. Germany had taken advantage of parts of the Treaty of Versailles that they restrict the number of infantry you can have and all that, but they don't really say much about airplanes. So Hitler was able to rebuild his air force, his Luftwaffe. But the British are helped by a technological innovation they have. The British have radar, which is basically sound waves. Sound wave goes out, comes back, and you can tell by how fast it comes back how far away something is. So with radar stations all over the place, you can tell when airplanes are coming into British airspace, which allows you to use the fewer planes that you have more effectively. And so the Battle of Britain goes on, but Hitler is just unable to break the spirit of the British people. His bombers are getting shot down thanks to coordination using this radar technology. And thus, the Battle of Britain is Hitler's first big military loss. He's not able to take Britain out of the war, and that's going to prove a big problem for him moving forward. Winston Churchill also, in Britain, he's I would say assisted, but he is housing and treating as the legitimate government of France a French general named Charles de Gaulle. De Gaulle escaped from France with some men and made it to England, and the French government that signed the deal with Hitler, Britain and de Gaulle both regard as illegitimate. As far as Winston Churchill is concerned, de Gaulle is the real government of France, whereas the Pétain, the guy who's actually in France still, is not. So, in other words, Britain is treating the people who are in France as if they are illegitimate, they don't belong in charge. Charles de Gaulle, he's the guy who's supposed to be in charge. And after World War II, he's going to get installed in power. This happens a lot, by the way. People will, different countries will argue about which government of a country is legitimate. Occasionally, you have a situation where two guys are claiming to be king, two guys are claiming to be president, and so it's sort of just whatever your political interest is, that's who you support. Happens all the time. With China, there's actually two Chinas, two countries claiming to be actually China, and the United States kind of goes back and forth which one they think is the real one. So, Charles de Gaulle, he's in Britain with... Now, Hitler at this point, he hasn't successfully beaten Britain. But Hitler, now, all the success that he's had other than the Battle of Britain, all the success he had, he completely throws away with a move that absolutely destroys his regime more than anything else is going to cause the collapse of Nazi Germany, and is Hitler's greatest mistake. And that is, Hitler decides to invade the Soviet Union. Now, the invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, takes place in June of 1941. Hitler puts a bunch of troops in Poland. Stalin's a little concerned by this. Doesn't really quite know what's going on, but Hitler assures him, no, we're buddies, and he's putting troops there. At which point Hitler then invades the Soviet Union. Now, at first, the Soviet army gets pushed back and pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. They're not very well led because Stalin's murdered most of the top generals as rivals or because Hitler told him to. Now, in June in Russia, it's not that bad. You roll in, and Hitler's got this mechanized army and just rolls into Russia, and you're doing really good. That blitzkrieg tactics, just move as fast as you can, attack and attack and attack. And as they're rolling through Ukraine and Russia, they're committing horrible atrocities. Alongside the regular German army, there's the SS, the Schutzstaffel. The German army is the German army, the army of Germany, but Hitler has his own personal army, the Schutzstaffel, and the Waffen-SS is the kind of military part of that. These guys aren't soldiers in the sense of they're joining their country's army. These are political soldiers. They're members of the Nazi Party. It's the Nazi Party's military, as it were. And these guys are selected by the head of the SS, by Heinrich Himmler, for personal qualities like fanatical obedience, willingness to commit any level of violence, complete ideological conformity to all Nazi doctrines. They have to be physically healthy, intelligent. Basically, they find the smartest, most ruthless, most evil people in Germany and put them in this. And these guys go around mass murdering people in Russian villages. Jews especially are singled out to be murdered. And just committing horrible atrocities. And this is going to be a major factor later on as the Russians come back through. Hitler pushes the Russian army back all the way to a place called Stalingrad, which is in the kind of south middle of Russia. Now, had Hitler succeeded in moving through Russia, you can kind of get the sense from the geography of what's next. Hitler moves into Central Asia, where there's a bunch of oil fields. Then he moves down south from Central Asia, which is what? India. Yes, good. I'm assuming somebody knew the answer to that. I hope you did. So, he moves south into India. One second here. Let me just make sure. Then he moves down south from Central Asia, which is what? India. Yes, good. I'm assuming somebody knew the answer to that. I hope you did. Okay. What is the sound issue exactly? 1 second here. Let me just make sure. Is there feedback? And again, you can use the chat feature. I see it really quickly when you do that. What is the sound issue exactly? Is there feedback? And again, you can use the chat feature. I see it really quickly when you do that. What is the sound issue exactly? Is there feedback? And again, you can use the chat feature. I see it really quickly when you do that. Okay, so you can hear me now. Okay, so you can hear me now. Okay, so you can hear me now. All right, do you hear an echo now? Do you hear an echo now? Echo, 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 echo. Echo, can you hear me now? You can't hear me now. Okay, hold on 1 second. All right, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? I'm talking. Echo, echo, echo. Should be able to hear me. Okay, so no echo. It sounds good. Awesome. Okay, back to World War II. All right. Pardon me, sorry. So Hitler, you should hear me, everything I said, the echo and everything. All right, Hitler invades Russia. Hitler gets to Stalingrad. If Hitler gets through Stalingrad, takes out Russia, goes into Central Asia, moves south to India. Who's in charge of India at this time? Britain. Who's also moving into India at this time from the east? Japan. So if Hitler is able to get through Russia, Central Asia, into India, and then Japan's coming the other way, bam, now they can finally link up. And with Japan and Germany linked up, now that really is going to make it very, very hard to dislodge either one. Both of them will have access to all the resources they need to keep a modern war going. Rubber, oil, cloth, everything you need to keep a war going is in those areas. Hitler knows it, and all, America and Britain and everybody knows it. And the only thing standing between Hitler and that is Stalin and the Red Army, the Soviet Army. The Soviet army fights with absolute, just fanatical loyalty, not to Stalin, but to their homeland. Stalin is able to cast World War II as a war of national defense as opposed to something that he basically got Russia into by poor diplomacy. One thing about this, too, in Russia, World War II is not called World War II. It's called the Great Patriotic War. Because for them, they're not all over the place fighting. They're basically fighting to save their country from a German invasion. The Battle of Stalingrad is where Hitler is stopped. It is considered by historians, as far as I can tell, all historians, that it is the largest battle ever fought. It involves millions of men fighting for months. And finally, at last, Hitler is stopped. And the worst thing about it is, it's February in Russia when this thing stops, and, well, that's not good. Russia gets really cold. In fact, this is one of the worst winters ever. And so that mechanized army that Hitler had that was working so well for him now becomes a major liability. Who's the guy behind me? There's no guy behind me. Kind of scaring me here. You guys seeing something I'm not? Is there a ghost or something? Here's what's behind me. Let's see here. I got my posters up here, and then over here, that's my deer skull, and then there's a framed newspaper print of classicist Benjamin Jowett that's an actual newspaper print from about 100 years ago. Or no, actually from 150 years ago that I got at an antique store that I'm really proud of. And then, let's see what else is over here. That's basically, I think I kind of showed you guys my room before, but here, that's where I'm at, basically. This is the school library, which is also all my books. And, so, yeah. I don't know, yeah. Okay, yeah, I hope it's just a picture. My room's haunted. I do remember them saying that they built this school on an Indian burial ground that previously had held an asylum for the criminally insane, and that had burned down. And then too, there were all kinds of weird cult rituals here. So who knows what's going on with this place? But nobody behind me. That's just Benjamin Jowett, who's right there. Very clever guy, classicist, translated Plato and the New Testament, and very famed teacher. So when I look at him, because I'm standing in the front, and when I stand at the front, I'm looking directly at him. And so as I'm teaching, I ask myself, am I measuring up to this guy? If he was sitting here, would he be proud of what I'm doing? And obviously, I hope he's proud of what I'm doing. I doubt he'd be impressed because he's a brilliant man, but I mean, it's inspiring to look at him. And also, the deer skull reminds me that, memento mori, I'm going to die one day like that deer. So, use my time wisely. All right, anyway. Speaking of dying, the Battle of Stalingrad, millions of casualties, but Hitler is stopped. That army that he has is a problem for him now. Trying to run vehicles when it's freezing is a big problem. You have to keep them going all the time because the engines won't start when it's that cold, which means he's burning up precious resources, fuel he doesn't have. And so, for that reason, Hitler's advance stops, and now he is getting pushed back. And he will continue to get pushed back for the rest of the war. Russia is what dooms his regime. Yeah, America gets involved, Britain, everything. The Russian invasion is what's going to end things for him. Hitler has awakened just a massive force that's going to be directed against him now. So, with that all going on, Hitler's in pretty bad shape. Now the United States gets involved in what's happening in Europe. The United States launches Operation Torch, which is an invasion of North Africa. It's America's first involvement in the war. You see Tank Commander Patton involved in this. North Africa is a big flat expanse. It's perfect for tank warfare. Patton, who studied even Nathan Bedford Forrest, that mobile warfare we talked about back in the Civil War. So he takes the lead in that. The Americans chase the Italians and the Germans out of North Africa. They finally defeat them. And then you can see the next logical step is to move over into Sicily, cross over into Sicily. And then from Sicily, once you take that over, into Italy. And now you can move up the boot of Italy into southern Europe. Now, the United States, like anybody does in any kind of war, has to decide on some kind of policy. How are we going to treat the enemy? How are we going to deal with them? That kind of thing. In other words, why are we fighting? Who are we fighting against specifically? And what do we hope happens? Well, Franklin Roosevelt believes, thanks to his gentleman C he got in history at Harvard back then. Yeah, he's a good kid from a good family. He's going to run the country one day. Give him a C. So, Roosevelt believes that during the Civil War, unconditional surrender was the policy of the United States, and that Ulysses S. Grant had forced Robert E. Lee to surrender unconditionally, which is to say, you surrender, we decide what we're going to do with you. That didn't happen. Grant actually gave very generous terms to Robert E. Lee, and Robert E. Lee reciprocated by disbanding basically his army and telling them not to engage in guerrilla warfare against the Union. When you tell people that we're not going to accept any kind of conditions, you surrender, and then we are going to figure out what we do to you, that inspires people to fight very, very hard, because putting your life in the hands of your enemy is not something people are going to do unless they're completely crushed and broken. The policy of the United States to pursue unconditional surrender against Germany and Japan, there are people who argue actually prolongs the war, because they fight harder, because they realize that they have very little hope of, especially the regimes. At this point, Hitler and the Japanese regime, they realize that a lot of people are going to hang when this is over. And without any assurances that their lives are going to be spared, they have no problem sending millions of their guys off to die to keep their necks from a noose. So, from Sicily, the United States moves over into Italy. Mussolini's regime collapses. It falls apart. Mussolini gets captured. He later gets freed in kind of daring raid by the Germans. They land on a mountaintop where he's held in prison, break him out, and fly him off. But at this point, Mussolini's basically in Hitler's power. The Germans have to move soldiers down into Italy to shore up the defenses. So now the Germans are not only fighting in Russia, they're fighting in northern Italy. And soon, they're going to be fighting on a completely different front. And that is, that's going to be Operation Overlord. Before it gets to that, though, the Allies have gone on the offensive in terms of bombing. Britain had been bombed. Germany flew across the English Channel, dropped bombs on London. At this point now, though, the offensive has shifted, and now America and Britain are launching bombing raids on Germany. This is strategic bombing, which is the euphemism for basically carpet bombing entire cities, flattening them out and blowing everything up. There's not really any way to do this while avoiding civilian casualties. We just drop bombs on cities, you're going to kill women and children and old people and people who have nothing to do with combat. This is true of every war in history, up to and including the present. The big deaths in war are always the people who are around the fighting. Civilians. When we talk about World War II in the Pacific, the people who are on the islands where the Americans and Japanese are fighting, they're the ones who are going to suffer more than anybody. If you got 5,000 dead Americans, that means you've got 50,000 dead civilians. And same is true with strategic bombing. The United States is dropping bombs. They're supposed to be hitting military targets and things like that, but for every soldier you kill, I mean, you're killing how many civilians? Entire German cities are just flattened by this, including Dresden, most famously, which didn't seem to have any kind of military value, and they just bombed it anyway. Strategic bombing is one of those things that illustrates how war can be morally corrosive. Things that seem awful in the beginning, by the middle of the war, start to make a lot of sense. Beginning of the war, when Japan's bombing China, when Hitler's bombing England, this bombing civilian populations was considered just beyond the pale, absolutely horrible. As the war goes on and the body counts are rising and people want to see this thing end, now people start to say, well, maybe strategic bombing is not so bad. Maybe bombing, mass bombing civilians is bad. Strategic bombing, though, that's okay. One thing also you'll see repeatedly throughout history is that war is just slathered with euphemisms. Nice words for something bad. So, the strategic bombing campaign is all about weakening Germany, and the big invasion, though, the big plan to just end this whole thing, is going to be the opening of an invasion of France, the opening of a new front in France, an amphibious invasion from Britain directly over into Normandy. Operation Overlord, the amphibious invasion of France. The planner of this is a guy named Dwight Eisenhower, just a kid from a farm in Kansas, went to West Point, worked his way up through the Army. He is now Supreme Allied Commander, which means he's in charge of all Allied forces, essentially, that there are. More men and power under his command than any other general on Earth. He's not some noble guy or king or anything. He's just a regular guy from the rural area who just happened to make it big in life and get promoted. So Eisenhower's planning this invasion. Now, the Germans are aware that they might try to invade France, so they got it really well defended. Amphibious invasions are very hard. It's easy to defend a beach. If you're ever trying to get off boats and get onto land, it's a very chaotic situation. It's easy to fight them off. So in order for this to work, Eisenhower actually has to deceive the Germans and convince them that the invasion is going to be somewhere else. So he creates entire fictional army units, fictional bases, fictional supply depots, sends fictional radio messages back and forth, all of which he hopes the Germans will interpret as the attacks coming from this way and not from where it's actually going to come. And on D-Day, the day that Operation Overlord begins, he sends all these ships across the English Channel, and of course he has no way of knowing whether his deception has worked. It does. Operation Overlord is a success. The Allies successfully storm the beaches at Normandy. British and American and Canadian units attack. They each achieve a beachhead, a secure position on a beach. And then this is going to be the start of Germany getting rolled back, not just from moving west from Russia, but moving east from France. So now Germany is caught on both sides, similar to what happened in World War I, but they always tried to avoid a two-front war. Now, at this point, I'm going to try to get through everything real quick. At this point, you have, you could try to take a gamble, maybe end things quickly. So you plan some things that are a little more daring than others. Operation Market Garden, a combined air assault. You drop guys out of planes behind enemy lines, and an infantry assault just kind of catch the German army surrounded. They try Market Garden. It doesn't work. Market Garden could have ended the war early. Instead, Market Garden is a failure, and the war will now go on for another year at this point. The Germans now still getting pushed back. And the Germans Hitler realizes they can't win the war at this point. Their best hope is to stop the war, to make further attacks so costly on the Allies that they will basically just negotiate. Maybe Hitler's regime can even survive. So to that end, they plan a major offensive. The Germans are going to they're going to mass infantry in one place, bust through the American line and try to get all the way through to Antwerp in Belgium, cutting the Allies in half. Now, could they fight back and get their position again? Yeah, they have the resources to do that. But if the Germans are able to demonstrate a successful attack on them, they'll be really reluctant to do that. And hopefully, Germans are hoping that they'll stop at that point. Now, this becomes known as the Battle of the Bulge. That big center mass of German troops attacks, and the line folds and gets pushed back, creates this bulge in the line, but they do not break through. The Germans are turned back. They've wasted precious resources. They got a whole bunch of men killed and captured, and they won't be able to launch any more attacks for the rest of the war. They're on the defensive. As the Allies cross into Germany, crossing the Rhine River on his 21st birthday into Germany is actually my maternal grandfather, Albert Bober. So he was there. One of my relatives actually moved through into Germany during World War II. When the Allies get into Germany, they discover evidence of the Nazis' master plan to basically exterminate what party doctrine says is their racial enemy, the Jews. The Nazis have set up a network of camps and transportation networks and intelligence agents, basically to identify, arrest, transport, and kill the entire Jewish population of Europe that's under their control. They put an absolute priority on this, even when they need trains for the war effort, even when they desperately need to send materials to the front line to keep their troops going. The Holocaust gets priority. Hitler believes that he can lose World War II, but if he wipes out the Jews of Europe, he's been successful. They put all their energy into this. And they succeed in wiping out 6 million of Europe's Jews. Most of Europe's Jews are concentrated in Eastern Europe, where Hitler has been in charge for a while, Poland and the Pale of Settlement. And it remains the single, certainly most concentrated effort at genocide in the 20th century. And understand the 20th century is where you see all kinds of genocides. Democide, government waging war on its own people, is a characteristic feature of 20th century regimes. we're going to see Stalin killed way more people than that, and Mao in China is going to kill even more than Stalin. So the Allies get together as Germany is being invaded at a place called Yalta on the Black Sea. They go to Stalin, and they discuss at Yalta what's going to happen after the war. Now, at this point, Roosevelt is basically still thinks Stalin's a pretty good guy. And Roosevelt is willing to allow Soviet troops to remain in Eastern Europe to create a buffer that Stalin wants there to keep Germany from ever invading Russia again. Russia wants to dominate all these countries in Eastern Europe. Churchill's against this, but at this point, Churchill's very much a junior partner in the relationship. After the war, Stalin will dominate Eastern Europe. This is what's going to lead to the Cold War. Truman, who comes after Roosevelt, is going to be a lot less nice to Stalin, and you're going to see a major deterioration in the relationship. So Yalta is where they plan the post-war world. Berlin falls in May of 1945. The Soviets come in to attack. Hitler at this point has retreated to an underground bunker. He gets married. He had a girlfriend. He gets married, and he and his wife the next day both shoot themselves. The German command passes, eventually ends with an admiral named Admiral Dönitz, and he surrenders on behalf of the German government unconditionally. And this, basically the fall of the Nazi regime, marks VE Day, May 8th, 1945, which is the end of World War II in Europe. Not the end of World War II. That's still going on because the United States is not just fighting Hitler, they're also fighting Japan. That's a subject of an entire lecture in and of itself, which is actually what we're going to do next. All right, so I tried to wrap things up quick. We got a little time for questions. Anybody got a question? Hit it in the chat room. Please let me know. Did everything after we kind of fix that sound issue? Were you guys able to hear me, and were you able to follow along with what I was saying? Everybody understand everything, and was I clear? And did I need to stop and go over anything again, or just in general, how'd the presentation go? Because this is really the first time it's been successful. Okay, but that echo issue is resolved now, right? Awesome. Good. Okay. Well, I hope you all had fun talking about World War II. Well, war wasn't fun, obviously, but I hope it was interesting. And I will see you guys. The next lecture we're going to be talking about is World War II in the Pacific, which is a very different kind of conflict. We're going to talk about a lot of issues related to that. So, awesome. Glad I'm now a successful broadcaster. So I'll be famous. Help this go viral, guys. And I will see you all next week or whenever we get together again. Miss McCall can let me know. And thank you all for watching.